Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Boxscore Geeks Show. We're going to talk a little bit about Super Bowl Sunday, perhaps introduce the possibility of deflated basketball games, deflated basketballs at the All-Star Game. I'm joined this week, as always, by Andres Alvarez, who is, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, hidden behind a magic curtain, but you can still hear his sultry voice. Dre?
Oh, yeah. And by the way, you missed out because this week my wife convinced me to try and grow a goatee. So I'm actually growing my beard out. I read up on it. Apparently, you grow the beard out. And then, so I've got like this annoying half beard going because you got to grow a full beard out first. So it's not shaved or shaped or anything yet. But you guys all missed out on that this week.
So if any of you out there were, planning on doing a time-lapse video of Dre, you're going to have an unfortunate gap. Also joining us is the man behind the magic, the man behind the curtain, the wizard of Fosterland, Brian Foster. You also can't see him, but
I'm actually on camera this week, Patrick.
Wait, he's on camera.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've got I've got a better camera angle too this week, so I look a little.
I feel like that lady from The Good Wife. I don't know if you guys ever watched The Good Wife. It's one of my favorite shows. But there's one episode where she's doing an interview with two black guys on ESPN or whatever the TV land equivalent of ESPN, and she keeps saying the wrong name. She's like, well, that's a really good question, Art. And then that guy's like, I'm not Art, I'm Brian. Can't you tell the two of us apart? And she's like, I'm not actually looking at a camera. And then they start thinking that she's like racist white lady who can't tell two black people apart. So
that's okay.
I don't know where that story was going, by the way. I just kind of felt like that right there.
No, and Dre, I hope that you didn't feel, with your new goatee, you didn't feel discriminated by that Budweiser Super Bowl commercial bashing on hipsters that drink craft beer. So
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch. This is gonna get me in trouble because I may or may not rant about this tonight. But in terms of one of the pieces of flack we get about not watching the games, I didn't watch any of the Super Bowl. I actually took the day off. It was nice for me. So yeah, I didn't watch it, and I did watch some Twitters, so I do know about the nationwide suicide or dead kid commercial, which whatever.
For some reason, I laugh about that commercial.
Weird, yeah, it was basically nationwide, buy our insurance because kids die. That was essentially what that commercial was. Totally insane.
Oh man, Patrick, you were so ready. We could have had them as a sponsor this week. Like, you just sponsored Nationwide. This show brought to you by Nationwide. Kids die.
Kids die. I'm sure Nationwide is really eager to sign me up. So, in other news, we're going to talk about, whether or not it's really a big deal that Marshawn Lynch won't talk to anybody but Conan O'Brien. And we're actually going to talk a little bit of basketball as well this week. So I think the first thing, I think we'd like to get some basketball out of the way because Dre's having massive technical difficulties, and if his audio keeps chopping up, he might just tell us to piss off and go to sleep. So I know you've had this on your mind, Dre. You wrote recently about DeMarcus Cousins and how he's not really a star, which, in the realms of things written about DeMarcus Cousins, doesn't seem like that's all too provocative or insulting, but it seems to have evoked a pretty visceral reaction from some people. So why don't you give us a rundown again of, why you really think he's not a star?
So a tangent before I even get going. The first thing with my DeMarcus Cousins piece is it just taught me I don't know anything about blogging. Because we typically on the show, you'll notice we don't post a lot of stuff on Fridays. And in fact, Patrick, your all-star piece got bumped a few times. One of us, it was heading into Friday. We said, let's not post it on Friday. Friday's dead. But then the DeMarcus Cousins, he got snubbed from the all-star game. I started looking over his stats. I said, heck, why don't I make this a post? And I said, it's topical. That's one of my litmuses to break that rule of not posting on Fridays. If it's super topical. So I posted it on Friday, bashed DeMarcus Cousins, and then crickets. Like, we look at analytics and stuff, and I saw that, and I actually emailed you guys out Friday night and said, I was right. I broke my own rule. Posted on Friday. It was topical.
Nobody gave a shit, right?
It mattered. No one cared. Then I'm gonna preemptively give my shout out. So Bob Bulgaris on Saturday night said you're out. Yeah, Harlem. Yeah, said you're out of your mind to me when I said DeMarcus Cousins isn't a star. And of course, I had this post that I just written, just waiting. So he said you're out of your mind, and immediately I got like 70 followers. It capped at about 100. So I got 100 followers for that, and I had this article just waiting there for people to go yell at.
So if you had to guess, are those 100 followers people that followed you because they agree with Harlabob and they wanted to show you what a moron you are? Or did you get those 100 followers because they saw you replying to Harlabob saying, no, Bob, you're out of your mind, and they agreed with you?
I didn't actually. My response to him is I said, maybe. And I said, but if I'm out of my mind, there's a big list of people that talk sports that are above me. It's a mix. It's always a mix with those, because you get the people that say, I agree. See, you were so right. I totally saw. Of course, you get more of the, what are you talking about? And so one of the things, and this was one of the parts of the article that didn't come across as well as I would like, and it's just because it's hard to explain, is one of the things people will defend DeMarcus Cousins on is his defense. Now, we have defense that we track. We have defensive rebounds, blocks, steals, personal fouls. And when you look at those, he's okay. He's not fantastic. Like, he's a good defensive rebounder. But as we've mentioned before, and by the way, this was a complaint people had for years with the wins produced stat, was these are a team activity. And we said, actually, you're right. Yeah. We looked at the stats. About half the time you get a defensive rebound, you just know one of your teammates would have gotten it. So when you look at that, he's good at defensive rebounding, but it's okay. And he's pretty much spot on for blocks. He's pretty foul prone. And he's good at steals. Net effect, he's okay on defense. On offense, and this is one of those stats that just is remarkable that people don't follow. He is horrendous at turnovers. Like, yeah. he's not a good shooter. Like, his 2-point shooting efficiency is actually significantly below average, but he makes up for that because he gets to the line. So he shoots a little better than Kobe Bryant when you factor everything in, which is fine, but that's not great. That's what we've said, right?
Yeah, well, just from myself, when I'm observing Cousins' games, I think there's a pretty good reason for that, and that is DeMarcus Cousins does one of two things. He either posts it up, and he's pretty efficient, pretty brutal down there, gets to the line pretty well, or he shoots like a 20-footer, and he's not very good at that. And then, by the way, even if he was very good at that, it still wouldn't be a very good shot. One of my biggest pet peeves is, all these advanced stats that say, like Carmelo Anthony is like the best in the league at 20-foot shots, which means, congratulations, you shoot 43% instead of 39%, which means you're the best in the league at taking a terrible shot that no one ever wants you to take. Yay. But it seems like that is DeMarcus Cousins' problem, is that, if he stuck to the bread and butter of what old school back to the basket centers did, if he essentially played kind of like Shaq did, which he's got the body for, he would probably be a brutally efficient offensive machine. But it's not really what he does. He shoots a lot of mid-range jumpers that just aren't very good shots, and that has the effect of making his total offensive efficiency pretty low for a center.
Yeah, and lowering his usage would help with the turnovers maybe too, guys.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, all we can say on that, like to Patrick's note, is we can look at his game. And like, I loved your point there. Like, people get impressed by certain things. I'm actually going to bring this up with DeMarcus Cousins, where the simple fact of the matter with him is he proves something to me in a few ways. So we had this first argument, which is the Kevin Love issue. I actually love DeMarcus Cousins versus Kevin Love for this point. We mentioned he's not that great. One of the commenters hops in and says, well, he's on a terrible team. He's got to carry the team. Of course he's a bad player. He's on a bad team. And then for years, we've seen the inverse of that, which is when Kevin Love's on a bad team and does well, they go, well, he's a shooter in the right. He's a stat stuffer. So basically what this kind of proves to me, and by the way, Anthony Davis, not on a good team either. Like, without Anthony Davis, that team is horrible. Like,
okay, so quick pop quiz, quick interruption. The Timberwolves against New Orleans without Anthony Davis, who wins?
Well, actually, Ricky Rubio's back part-time, so I'm with the Timberwolves right now.
Okay.
But that's a cheat.
That was a cheat.
But
I think they may have actually even played once this year where Anthony Davis was injured, so we probably have some empirical data on this. But anyway, go on to continue your point.
Yeah. So what I've noticed is people will flip flop on excuses. The exact same excuse that makes a player bad. DeMarcus Cousins' stats are bad because he's on a bad team.
Yeah.
When they can be used to justify the exact opposite, I can't really give that excuse any credence.
Yeah, no. My other favorite one is that it is that the wins produced formula doesn't capture defense, and depending on which viewpoint the person has, it either undervalues or overvalues defense. So if we say, well, Tyson Chandler's amazing, they'll say, oh, well, yeah, that's just because you overvalue defense and defensive rebounding. I'm like, okay. And if we say things like DeMarcus Cousins is not that good, they say, well, that's just because wins produced doesn't properly value defense, because DeMarcus Cousins must be mystifyingly amazing at defense in some way that your numbers don't capture. So really just, you can't quantify defense. And you know what? I'll even give you that. You're right. There's lots of parts of defense you can't quantify. But then don't come at me and say, well, I can't quantify defense, but I know that for this player, you're underestimating it, and for this player, you're overestimating it. I'm like, well, fuck you.
Well, so
why don't we just have my mom decide which one's better at defense?
So that's one of the things we actually have, though, is what's important about the wins produced formula. This is one of the trickier parts to get, and I understand that, is we have a team defensive component. Now, there is a stat out there that I had chosen to just never mention until Basketball Reference had to go and put it on their freaking site. Because Basketball Reference, when Justin Kupatko was there, they had some semblance of being a good statistical site. And as soon as he left, they turned into at least on terms of their judgment, with new stuff they've been adding, just have boggled my mind. But so anyway, there's a stat called BPM, and what BPM does is it uses box scores, and it uses this weird regression that, Dave Barry, who teaches regressions for, a living, wouldn't pass his freshman class. Like, it would be like, what the heck are you doing? But okay, uses this regression, comes up with a model that only explains about 80% of wins in basketball. And then what it does is it takes the strength of schedule adjusted point differential for every team, which, as we've mentioned on this show before, can be described as the exact formula that explains wins, evenly distributes that among all players on each team, adds that back in, and lo and behold, it can explain wins. Like that. So people think that's what the defensive factor in wins produces. It's not. It's included in the original regression so that we are sure the value of things like rebounds, points, etc., are correct. And I don't know if I'll get time to rant about this more later in the show, but when people come up and say you stubbornly stick to certain stats or viewpoints, that's not our fault. We should point out basketball is a game that has rules. The rules have pegged the values of these things at things. When we make a model, we're not like trying to extrapolate something we don't know the secrets behind. There's a rule book that says when this ball goes through the hoop, it's worth 2. When this ball goes through the hoop, it's worth 3. When this ball goes through the hoop, it's worth 1. If you get the ball, you're allowed to try and put it through the hoop. The person with the most points wins. Like, those are the rules. So we're not like stubbornly sticking to some like crazy notion. We're literally like, the basketball rule book says this. When you put those stats through a regression, it pretty much matches up identically, like exactly what you'd expect. And then as a result of that, we can look at which players we think are good. And that's where we're at.
Well, I'm just playing the part of devil's advocate here. So I think much of wins produce assumes that, sorry, let me start over. The parts of defense that are not captured in box score statistics, like steals, for example, are captured in box score. Defensive. Anyway,
to cut you off quickly, individual defense, it's individual box scores. They are in the box score. They're not attributed to individuals.
Yeah. So, for example, a team's defensive field goal efficiency, in other words, the percentage that the opposing team shot, that is captured in the box score, but that isn't attributed to any one individual. When Chris Paul shoots 6 for 12 for 15 points, that's captured in the box score, but it doesn't say in the box score that it is the opposing point guard's fault or whatever. That is not attributed to him. So what wins produced does is assumes that defense is a team-oriented activity and divides that stuff more or less equally among all the players. And
based on per minute. And by the way, we can fully accept, and that there are better ways to do it, and we're getting there. One fantastic thing that we're going to have enough data in a year or two to use is the sports VU data that NBA.com has. We can actually start incorporating some of that and actually try and make some of this smart.
Yeah, no, and I agree that there's tons of things to make smarter there, and I also agree that I think that assumption has a very deep basis in fact. I think defense is mostly a team activity, and that the team schema is the thing that probably has the biggest impact, and that's why team defense is one of the things you see coaches actually have a measurable impact on. At the same time, you'd be foolish to say that, for example, Glenn Davis is as good at team defense as Kevin Garnett. That's just probably, or at least Kevin Garnett 5 years ago. That's probably not true. The problem is quantifying it, and the issue right now is that dividing it up equally probably does a better job of quantifying that, or at least it evens out in the aggregate, versus just kind of putting your thumb there and saying, I'm going to give Glenn Davis a 5, and I'm going to give Kevin Garnett a 15.
What I'll go bigger, and Dave actually said this, and I'll be candid, I would have been okay with the wins produced formula, leaving out team defense, saying, here are the things that we can attribute to the individual we know they're good at. Here's how good their team is as a whole at defense. You make your, when people make this call about like, you take this player over this player, that's so ridiculous, because of course, if I was trading DeMarcus Cousins for somebody, another player, let's say Andrea Magnani, obviously I say no. But, I'm not just going to like look at this one number, look at them side by side, say this one's higher, I take that. There's a bunch of other factors. So defense might be one of those where I go, one of the examples I bring up is Kevin Garnett in his last year on the Timberwolves. I don't know if it was the worst, but it was bottom 5. He was in the bottom 5 defense in the league. Kevin Garnett, who won Defensive Player of the Year on one of the best defensive teams of all time. Like if you look at the 2008 Boston Celtics, their defense is one of the best numbers ever. And most people would agree Kevin Garnett was part of that, but he was on a team with a horrible defense. Same is true of DeMarcus Cousins this year. So all I'll say about that is there's this factor over here. We know it matters. And that was the important part. I actually put that in my DeMarcus Cousins article. I go, it doesn't matter as much as people want. When I'm talking about an individual player, you're going to hear me click here, so apologies. But, I'm going to go to Boxscore Geeks right now. And if you look at just an individual player, the best player in the league, I think I'm going to guess it's still Anthony Davis at the top. If not, the best player getting minutes, by the way, Hassan Whiteside, where'd he come from? Let's see if he can keep that up. But Anthony Davis is currently at 8.6 points over par per 48, which means if he plays the full game, you'd expect his team to win by 9 points. If we look at team defense on the best and worst, and I want to stress most teams are not even this high. The Timberwolves, your Timberwolves, Patrick, your former Timberwolves, sorry. The Timberwolves and the Milwaukee Bucks are the two extremes, and they're plus and minus 5 points over par per game. And I want to stress that's among the whole team. So if you give that to an individual, it's 1 point. So when we have players that have 9 points over par, which makes sure the team defense is included in part of the regression, and I tell you the worst case scenario is about 1 point over par plus or minus, it's hard for me to ever say that I think Anthony Davis is significantly over or underrated with that in mind.
Okay.
That's all. And so that's what I'm saying. And you were saying, yeah, we could tweak the individual defense and maybe we agree it's not right. I agree there, but I'm saying the bigger point, which people don't take away from, and what I'll wrap up on DeMarcus Cousins with here is when the defensive stats are concrete, when they're rebounds, blocks, steals, personal fouls, people will say you're overrating them that don't matter. Like Dennis Rodman. We go, Dennis Rodman, this is absolutely true. And you know what? I've just learned at this point in life to get over it. If you guys want to insult me about this comment, DeMarcus Cousins was the MVP of the 1996 to 1998 Chicago Bulls. He was the reason they won those next three-peat. Well, Michael Jordan was great. Without Dennis Rodman, the Bulls don't go down as one of the greatest teams ever. He was the best player on that team over those 3 years, significantly better than Michael Jordan. A huge part of that was his rebounding. But people will say, you overrate his rebounding. Now, as soon as I get a defensive stat that's nebulous, we don't have a concrete number 4. Think of Kobe Bryant or Bruce Bowen's lockdown D. As soon as I get that, people tell me how amazing it is and how I underrate it. So yeah. I've just noticed this, what happens with stats, and it's almost, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but you brought up like people believing that God dictates the Super Bowl winner. And when you look at like,
for the viewers who weren't listening in the pre-show, in other words, all of you, there was a beautiful article on Vox.com today that said 25% of Americans believe that God helps determine the winner of the Super Bowl. And I'm pretty sure, they don't mean it in a like, oh, okay, all these nebulous complex events led up to these 50 players getting together every year to win a Super Bowl. No. I think those players mean God basically saying, fuck the Seahawks, and pressing the magic button at the last minute or something like that. It's kind of a scary number. Anyway.
Yeah. When like Richard Feynman, one of my favorite philosophers, scientists out there, basically points out that like theism is kind of retreating, right? Because the purpose of theism originally was to explain the world. And as we learn more and more and more, that role gets smaller and smaller and smaller, hopefully to the point where we don't use it in our science. We hope we don't use it in our medicine. We hope. I don't want to get us down this rabbit hole. I apologize, Patrick.
Yeah, don't bring up vaccination or you're going to get another rant out of me.
I'm gonna jump back. But all I'm saying is the reason we notice things like lockdown defense are such a huge part of people's arguments is because it's the last remaining part of sports they can't explain. And what you can tell them very candidly is it doesn't matter, right? I can tell you that it's not that big. We can look at it, and it's probably more a part of the coach and a defensive scheme.
All right, I don't want to cut you too short here, but because we're almost halfway done already. But so what you did with DeMarcus Cousins is you made some assumptions saying, okay, well, what if I just fudge his numbers and I assume he's this good, this good, this good, this good on defense? And what did you find?
Oh, yeah. So on that point, I said, DeMarcus Cousins on a bad team. We know that. What if I assume he's on the best defensive team, which is odd to me, is the Bucs? What if he's on the Bucs? And then also one step further, what if we assume he's 40% of the Bucs defense? So he's amazing. And then I said, let's assume the contrapositive of all the other players in the West. Let's assume that Anthony Davis is actually a Minnesota Timberwolves player in disguise. His defense is overrated. And I also assume he's two players on the Timberwolves. So Anthony Davis's defense is equal to two starting Timberwolves. And what I found is the gap between DeMarcus Cousins and the top players in the league was still significant. He's the 14th best front court player in the league and still not a star according to our measures. So it's kind of just, I'll even let you overrate the defense. I'll even let you inflate it. I'll even let you say DeMarcus Cousins is the greatest defender in the history of the Western Conference. And what I found was that's still not enough to overcome his, so-so shooting. It's not bad. It's okay. His so-so shooting, his horrendous turnovers, his foul proneness. It's just not enough. He's still not a star, according to us. Now, according to conventional measures, according to pay, points per game, double doubles, whatever, fine. I give you that. But according to us, no.
Well, this is a great segue into the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is, and again, keep circling back to an article you wrote again, because I've been kind of lazy lately. Lazy or
drunk
Seattle.
with sorrow.
Yeah.
Or not really sorrow. Actually yesterday I was not sad at all. I was just in a kind of a hazy rage about Pete Carroll. And what's weird is, like many other people, at the beginning of this season, I said, you know what, I'm quitting football. I'm not really going to watch football. And that I did it for 10 or 11 weeks. I wasn't really watching any football. But it turns out when you live in a city where the team is the Super Bowl champions and all of your friends want to get together every Sunday and watch the game with you, it becomes really hard to just be like, no, I don't, all of these social problems that I can't fix. And, it becomes very difficult, which is why way back in the day when I wrote that article, I think I anticipated this happening, because I said at the time, if you are against football, then fine. But if you're also watching a lot of football, that's cool too.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. And I mean, the other thing is just to consider the Freakonomics guys are my favorite on this, where they basically point out your moral compass. Am I coming through, by the way?
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt everybody and say my headphones went out there, so
sorry.
I was probably
So the
talking right on
Freakonomics
top
guys
of you, Dre. So I hear everybody now, and I hope you all hear me.
Yeah, we're synced up again. Start going, guys.
I think it was spotty internet. I'll maybe trim it depending on how long it went for.
No, in this case, it was actually my Bluetooth headphones. All of a sudden, there's this lady in my ear going, "Not connected." I'm like, "Wait, what? What? Why?"
All right. So
no, the call recovered. The call recovered.
Just one of those type of nights. But okay,
So anyway,
so
to continue where I was in Seattle and I was watching football, even though I had promised not to watch. Well, not promised, made a choice not to watch it, and it'll be easier to follow through on that choice next year because I think I'm going to take the under on Seattle next year because their defensive coordinator is leaving to coach. Who's he leaving to coach? He's leaving to become head coach somewhere else. I'm trying to remember where. And given that play calling yesterday, I don't really trust.
I'll do some research on that.
The rest of the Pete Carroll coaching staff. And I honestly have always claimed, I've always believed, I should say, that football is the sport where the coach has the biggest impact on outcomes because football just feels like where play calling is so important, schemes are so important. Penalties, which are a part of player discipline, is so important. It seems like, each person executing his one role that he has to play is so important. It has always seemed to me like the sport where the coach has the biggest impact on game day. In basketball, a coach may be important in terms of preparing his team for game day, but then when it comes to game day, even if you're Phil Jackson, there's a certain element of, Kobe Bryant or Scottie Pippen or whoever has still got to hit shots. I can't go out there and do it for him.
Well, can we be one big thing about football that makes your point much huger is, let's say Jason Kidd draws up a play at the end of the game, and it ends up being a turnover. So the Bucs lose the game. Oh my God, Jason Kidd, what a horrible coach. There were 200 possessions in that game where the Bucs did good or bad and whatever, and that dictated the outcome. In football, I've looked at this before. It's usually between 10. Each team gets about 10 to 15 possessions.
Yeah.
So each possession is so valuable. So when you have a coach that, we get so infuriated about 4th and 1, or maybe you should run the ball in if you have Marshawn Lynch and 3 downs, maybe just a thought.
Yeah, the big thing to me is they decided to pass on 2nd down, which is whatever, kind of stupid. But no. The crucial decision point was let's wait and kill 20 second pass, which is a combination of 6 decisions that are all fantastically terrible. It wasn't just if he'd passed the ball with 46 seconds left, that still would have been a bad decision, but he chose to pass and also eat some clock before passing in this crazy misguided attempt to be super clever with clock management. And I think it was Brian Burke that spoke up and said, well, passing on 2nd down kind of makes sense because the only way to get 3 plays off in 26 seconds, you got to pass once. And so the 2nd down makes the most sense because it keeps the defense honest on 3rd and 4th down. To which I'll say, one, it's not like everyone's sitting around going, gee, I wonder why we only have 26 seconds left. No, you decided to only have 26 seconds left about 15 seconds ago. That was your choice. 2, it doesn't necessarily keep the defense honest on 3rd and 4th down because, as everyone knows, the closer you get to a 4th down, the more predictable your offense gets because your options narrow. So the defense, by definition, the defense has to be most honest on 1st and 2nd down when the array of plays the defense might run is wide, whereas you get closer to 3rd and 4th down and the team's options become it's like playing chess. At the beginning there's tons of moves you can make. At the end there aren't that many moves to make. When there's only a bishop, a few pawns, and a queen left, there aren't a ton of moves you can make. So I don't necessarily agree that passing on 2nd down keeps the defense more honest on 3rd and 4th down. And again, I'll just circle back to it. You chose to eat those 15 seconds of clock. So don't come at me and say, well, I had to make the decision that way because there were only 26 seconds left. That's not the point where you made the decision. You made the decision much earlier than that when you had more options. So I think I promised not to rant about Pete Carroll today, and I'm doing it anyway, aren't I?
I would feel bad. This is one of those, I don't think the metaphor, but let's say you get a really famous pianist to come to a dinner party and there's a Steinway in the corner and you just keep looking at him and you're like, hey, it's over there. So we have a Seattle sports geek who's on a sports site the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday, and we regularly discuss inefficient coaching, and you're like, I'm not going to talk about it. And I think me and Brian have both just been kind of looking at you going, if you want to talk about, the Super Bowl, we're not going to stop you.
Well, for one, I don't think I'm a football expert. But I would have so here's the thing, and this is an absolute cliche, but I think sometimes, okay, I'm a big fan of Occam's razor, right? Sometimes the simplest explanation is the one that you should go with. And it seems to me it's 2nd and 1. You've got 3 downs. You have, not only is he the best running back in football, but he's the best running back in football in this particular situation. Like, this is what he does, right? He scores touchdowns in the red zone. This is what he does. 17 touchdowns in this season, and I think only one of them was a passing touchdown. Like, this is a guy who has lived and died on doing this. So I think you're just overthinking it. I think you just give him the ball 3 times, and if you can't punch it in with Marshawn Lynch from the 1 in 3 plays and 40 seconds, then when the game's over, you have a very easy press conference where you just talk about how great Belichick coached his team and how great that Patriots defense was on that goal line stand. And not one single guy in that press conference, nor any of the other head coaches in the NFL, nor any other NFL expert in the world looks at you and says, "You moron, why didn't you pass the ball?" Like, that doesn't happen. And I'm not saying that the conventional wisdom is always the right one, but I'm just saying when everybody agrees, when fucking everybody thinks that's the right thing to do, maybe you're just overthinking it by calling a fancy pass. By deciding to eat 15 seconds of clock followed by a fancy pass on 2nd and 1 for the Super Bowl championship. It just seems like, am I out of line here, guys? Help me out here. This is crazy.
No, I mean, I was watching the internet, and
the internet exploded, of course.
And I mean, the next day, what you got is you got 2, and one of them to me is going to sound a little mean, and I'm going to call this. I don't think I'm going to get my rant off. You let me rant about DeMarcus Cousins. I appreciate that. So I'm going to leave the other rant on the table. What I'll say is I've got a post this week coming up about comment policy and kind of my general take on how some people speak to us, and you'll get to enjoy that. And I'm not going to rant about that. But there's something I'd call like almost 538 syndrome, which is you get a smart person in to discuss something, and they're smart, but they may not understand the intricacies of the problem domain. So they get an article up quickly, and that's one of the problems with sports. You want an article up quickly so you can put it out the next day. Like we were saying, it's the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday. We've got a Seattle native we want to talk. So Justin Wolfers put out a post about game theory, about why passing wasn't such a bad idea, because what you were saying, in game theory with rock, paper, scissors, you can't always throw up rock, because if you always throw up rock, your opponent will always throw up paper. Obviously, one of the problems with that logic is in rock, paper, scissors, you can't throw up rock, they throw up paper, and you punch them in the face and you win anyway.
That is fantastic. Yeah. In fact, a much better analogy is the Star Wars game. It's like, well, the Wookiee can do whatever the fuck he wants because he'll just rip your arm off if he doesn't like the outcome. And it's like, they call him beast mode for a reason. And the thing is, I think how many rods did Lynch rush for yesterday? It was like 125 or something. And it's not like every time Marshawn Lynch ran the ball, the defense is sitting there running through game theory options as how should I guard this? They know the ball's going to Marshawn Lynch, and just sometimes he breaks tackles and you can't grab him, and he gets that extra couple inches, and there's a whole line of really huge offensive linemen all pushing against you, and sometimes it's not about knowing what play's coming. Sometimes it's just about execution. And forgive me if I'm wrong about this, but I don't feel like I'm going out on a huge limb to say that, a 4th and 1 situation with Marshawn Lynch punching in, running gap or whatever, is something that the Seattle Seahawks offensive line has practiced ad nauseum. And I realize that defenses practice against goal line stands all the time too, but the thing is they don't get to practice against Marshawn Lynch every day. So there's just a simple element of sheer, execution, talent, power, whatever you want to call it there, that will win out often anyway, even if the defense knows that's what's coming.
Well, I mean, that's what we talk about in basketball. Is another one of Dave Barry's points that I love, which is, the defense knows they have to stop LeBron James. Like, if you're talking a game of rock, paper, scissors, the defense knows what to do. And I mean, I've watched LeBron James live, and it's very odd. What he does is very obvious. He gets the ball, he looks at the hoop. If there's an open lane to the hoop, he runs at it. If you block that lane to the hoop, he passes to someone in the corner who's open for a three. And he can just do that over and over again. And the same is true, by the way, of John Stockton and Karl Malone. They just ran the pick and roll over and over and over again. I get really annoyed, by the way, when people bring up usage curves, which, by the way, that is going to come up in the article I'm bringing up. You bring up the usage curve with some crazy thought experiment in your head, it's just going to get deleted because we've heard them all. But there's not this crazy thing in basketball where how you did on the previous play, unless there's like a fast break or something, right? How you did on the previous play doesn't give you magical powers on the next play. The fact that you block LeBron James last play doesn't mean he's not just going to come at you again and dunk on you. And so, like, to what you're saying, that the talent gap, it's the exact same thing here. It's like they can know exactly what they're supposed to do. They can be ready for it. The problem is you've got one of the best running backs in the league, and then also a quarterback. Like my friend said, okay, if Marshawn Lynch, if they're waiting for him, well, Russell Wilson can run pretty well too. So what about a fake handoff and he runs?
Yeah, what about a play action fake? Yeah. It's great that you bring up the point about LeBron James, and because we've talked about this before. It's like, it's not like defenses go out there and they forget about LeBron James. They're trying. They just can't always stop him from doing what he's trying to do. I think the same is true in football. Game theory is certainly an option, a consideration. You can't run the exact same variant of the exact same play every time. But even if you're saying run versus pass, how many running plays do you think there are in that book for Marshawn Lynch, even on 4th and 1? There's got to be 50, right? There's got to be more than that in that playbook, and the defense cannot counter all of them, or the defense cannot follow some optimal strategy where they're countering all of them. There's a certain amount of, as I said, call it talent or execution or performance, whatever. Somebody has to make a big play, and often enough, it's going to be really hard for the defense to make a big play on a running back like Marshawn Lynch and all of his offensive linemen, given that they get 3 tries, right? This isn't a one and done thing. They get 3 tries to punch it in, and it's just, there's a reason all of the odds makers had Seattle at 75% before that touchdown. And that reason is that when there's only 1 yard to go, it's really fucking hard to stop a team from doing it if you give them 3 tries. It doesn't matter if you're on the goal line or in the 50-yard line. How many times does any team have 2nd and 1 and not make the first down? Ever. Like, the chances are really low, even when they're running plays all the time. There's certainly elements of keeping the defense honest, but it's really not that complicated. There's only 1 yard to go, and you got 9 human beings pushing and 1 human being running behind them, and 1 guy handing off the football who can maybe even then give the guy running a little nudge in the back to help there. It's a fairly straightforward math that, even if we assume everybody on both sides of the line has equal talent and they all kind of munge in the middle and it's a 50-50 toss-up, well, you get 3 tries. Give me a coin flip and I'll bet you a lot of money that I can get heads 1 out of those 3 tries.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got nothing else to say. I'm so glad we got that. I'm really glad we got that, because I thought, so as we always mention on the show, we have a pre-show, and I thought we got all your ranting out, because even at the end of your pre-show ranting, well, I don't really want to rant on the show, so I'm so glad we got it. That's my opinion. Okay, so how did we got from DeMarcus Cousins to that? So where are we going from there?
Okay, do we have time to talk about the Atlanta Hawks?
Of course, we always have time for the Hawks.
God, we love this team, don't we? I love this team, and it's not just because they're winning me a lot of money. But I've noticed it's got to be like 2 weeks running now. Almost every day you can find on some blog is an article about, are the Hawks for real? Which to me seems like kind of an absurd thing to say, because they're now 40-8. I don't think they played yesterday, so they should be 40-8. Which, 40 wins is a pretty big sample. You know, if you polled anybody and asked if they wanted to take a bet on whether the Hawks would play 500 ball the rest of the way, you know, let's say I took somebody like my dad who never watches the NBA because he lives in Minnesota and the Timberwolves are awful. And I asked him, you know, hey, Dad, would you like to bet on whether or not the Hawks play 500 ball the rest of the day? He would say, well, how well have the Hawks played so far? And I would tell him 40-8. And he would say, well, I'll take the over on that. It doesn't seem like a very complex arrangement. And it seems like a very different conversation than, you know, if the team started the season 15-0 or 17-0, they went in January 17-0. If this were December 1st and they had just played 17-0 in November, that would be an entirely different conversation, because you might say there in 17 games, well, they got lucky 5 times. And really they're only 12-5 or whatever, right? But now they're 40-8. And how many times can you possibly get lucky? They've had 2 winning streaks of over 15 games, I think. And how many times can you really get lucky in that span? So I think it's kind of obvious that they are for real. And I think what people are wondering about is, can they win the NBA title? Are they really good enough to win the NBA title? And before I give the mic to you to talk about this, I'm actually going to probably surprise you and say no, they can't. And I'm going to elaborate on why in a minute. But I wanted to first hear your opinion, whether you think they can go that far, and whether you think all this conversation about whether the Hawks are real is kind of bullshit or not.
Well, I'm going to say they can. I mean, it's good we're not agreeing, to be first off, but
yeah.
I mean, let's first off.
Otherwise, the show gets really boring, right? It's like, NBA, okay, well.
let's stress first off the reality that winning an NBA title, even if you're the favorite, actually suffers from that exact problem you were just talking about with the 4th and 1, which is, even if you're a 60% favorite in the playoffs every round, which, you know, I mean, we can maybe give you 80 in the first round, right? The first round's the first team's a pushover, but, you know, even if we gave you 80, 70, 60, 60, right? Something like that. You're the favorite. Even then, if you look at those odds, right, that's what, 56, you drop down to about 40, and then you drop down to like 30%. So from the beginning of the playoffs, before anything's happened, if you're the favorite, your odds are really like 3-10 to win, and that's even if you're the favorite. So it's hard to win a title, and we've noticed that lots of times. One of the best teams in the NBA will win a title. The only example and I don't even want to call this recent history, is the 6th seeded Houston Rockets managed to win a title. You know, they went the whole way. We've seen like an 8th seed go all the way there and fall short, but the 6th seed, that's like the only case we've ever had of a non-top 4 seed winning an NBA title in recent history, because, you know, it's really, really hard.
Yeah, hang on. So we were talking about the first Rockets team, right?
It's the second one. And actually
the one with Clyde?
That's a bit of a cheat code, because they were the 6th seed, but they traded for Clyde Drexler midseason. And he was, I think I've looked at these numbers before, I believe he was their finals MVP, if we're being legit with ourselves.
And then there was also, I forget which year it was. It might have been 2001 or 2, somewhere around then. There was a year where Shaq was hurt like for 40 or 50 games, and the Lakers were the 5th seed, but Shaq was healthy going into the playoffs. And you're like, and I remember this because at the time the Timberwolves were the 4th seed, and the Timberwolves finally had home court advantage. But then, of course, they played the Lakers, who really, in a sane world, would have been the 1st or 2nd seed. So it was like, okay, 5th or 6th year in a row, not getting out of the first round. And then those Lakers went on to win the title.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, and I'd forgotten about that. And I think one reason I've never counted, they were still a 50 seed. They were like 2nd in their conference, a 50 seed. So, yeah.
50 win, you mean?
Yeah, 50 win, sorry.
Well,
50 seed, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Well, you're right. And that's one of the big reasons I would vote against the Atlanta Hawks. But the other actually bigger reason is that there's been a lot of research on this, and I think Arturo has done a lot of research on this, that, you know, a big factor in predicting playoff winning is the playoff experience you have on your roster. And that is true even after you control for performance, because of course there's a selection bias there. A team full of guys with a lot of playoff experience is going to be a better team, because, you know, that's why they have playoff experience, is because their players are better. But even after you control for that variable, there's an impact of having guys with more experience. So and I like to call this sort of, or I think I'm going to call this like the the Toronto Raptor experience. I mean, it's kind of what happened to the Raptors against the Nets last year. I think it was a big part of that series that the Nets had all these guys with tons of playoff experience, Garnett and Paul Pierce and guys like that, and they beat the Raptors, who had almost nobody with any significant playoff experience. And I think the same problem is going to happen for the Hawks this year, because they have Fabulous Sefolosha, who's been in one NBA Finals. Is that right? Maybe two. Wait, how many finals have the Thunder been in?
Only one with, and that's
and beyond that,
that's one final.
Beyond that, they got a lot of guys who have been in one or two playoff series, or maybe first round and done kinds of situation. They don't have many guys who have gone, to the finals or have a ton of playoff experience. And I think that will be a huge impact in a series against, for example, the Cavaliers or the Bulls. With all those guys with tons of playoff experience, and I don't know. I mean, I got all kinds of suspicions. I think there's some referee bias going on. Players who have won championships or been in the finals or been in lots of playoff conditions tend to get more favorable calls. There's certainly elements of adjusting to a different style of play in the playoffs. I mean, it's obviously it's going to be a bit of a confusion thing whether or not this benefits Cleveland or not, because they have guys that have been there before, like LeBron and and Mike Miller, and guys who've been to the playoffs, Sean Marion, but they also have guys like Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love who have never played a playoff game, so it's not really sure how that's going to affect them. But I would want to give the edge to, or at least not the edge, but I would say that a matchup between the Bulls and the Hawks in the regular season, I'm going to take the Hawks by 5 or 6. But if it comes to playoff time, like in the Eastern Conference Finals, I think it's going to be much closer to an even matchup. And then the situation gets much worse in the finals, because then in the finals, they play against a team like the Spurs or the Mavericks, a team that's loaded with guys who have won multiple rings. And I think you have to give the edge to, and this isn't this isn't a platitude about knowing how to win. This is just really backed up on data. You look at what influences playoff winning and playoff experience. Again, even after controlling for player performance, is a big factor. And I think that is going to be an issue for the Hawks this year, because it's hard for me to see them losing before the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think it's going to be a big factor in the Eastern Conference Finals and in the NBA Finals if they get there. I would not place my money on the Hawks to win it in the Eastern Finals, at least not without some good odds.
Well, yeah,
what do you think about it?
I mean, like I said, this is an easy bet for me, because we just talked this weird coin flip scenario, and I said ahead of time, I was like, well, I think their odds, and this is if they're the favorites, are less than 30. And then, I mean, one of the things to consider too about the Cavaliers is they have been turning it around, and if they can get the ball to Kevin Love a little more, and LeBron James is healthy, I'm scared of that team. Another part of that, by the way, is let me check something really quick on the Hawks. But Arturo's had 2 kind of points on the playoffs. The first is experience really matters a lot, and the second one is that teams tend to shorten up their bench, and a team with LeBron has such an edge on that. When you talk about
having the best player in the series is a huge advantage, and that's going to be the case with Cleveland almost always. There may be some matchups where it's not true, like against the Clippers, you might say Chris Paul, LeBron, kind of a bit of a wash. But yeah, it's such a big deal to say, because it's all fine and good to say your bench is good, but your bench isn't going to be that good because LeBron James is playing 43 minutes. So there isn't some backup small forward that your backup small forward gets to dominate.
Yeah, and so if you look at the Hawks, they only have 2 players, and this is going to be a little mean to Teague, but they only have 2 players that are playing significant minutes above star level. You can give Paul Millsap, he's close, but they got Kyle Korver, who's amazing, Jeff Teague, and Paul Millsap. These are their 3 kind of big horses. Now,
although I think if you look at splits, Horford is getting in that category because he started out the year pretty awful, and they were kind of winning despite him.
Interesting.
And he's gotten much better lately. And so I think that's what has been the difference between, when in the beginning they looked like a good team that's slightly overperforming, and now they look like a great team that's slightly overperforming. And I think a lot of that is because Horford now kind of looks like his old self again.
You might actually make me take this back now then. But if you look at, say, for instance, the Cavs, they got LeBron James, Tristan Thompson, and Kevin Love. These guys are all three amazing. You look at the Hawks, and they've really got Kyle Korver, and then the problem is you run into these maybes. Maybe Paul Millsap, maybe Jeff Teague, maybe DeMar Carroll. You said Al Horford. I'm taking a quick look at his what you just said, his splits. Yeah, wow. That is a heck of a January.
Yeah, isn't it though? Al Horford is looking like Al Horford again, and that should be scaring the fuck out of everyone in the East.
The Hawks, you might have just flipped me on this because the Hawks with Teague, Korver, Carroll, Millsap, Horford, and Thabo off the bench look really scary. Now, actually, here's one issue, and we're going to have to wonder about Budenholzer, is coaching, because the one issue we've had is we've had coaches that decide, this was Mike Brown's issue with the Cavaliers, that they're like, I'm going to do a deep rotation in the playoffs. George Karl did this too. I'm going to do a deep rotation in the playoffs, try and get us over the hump, keep us fresh. And they lose because the other team's like, I don't care. We're not playing for tomorrow.
Yeah. I think that's, I mean, my impression of Mike Budenholzer, is it Budenholzer or Budenholzer? I think it's Budenholzer.
I think it's Budenholzer. I think I added the
sorry, you had me confused there. Anyway, my impression is that he's a great coach who knows exactly how to use his personnel. And I suspect that, these shorter rotations you're seeing now is really just an emulation of what Pop is doing in terms of keeping his good players fresh for when it really matters. I think you're going to see, the starting five playing 38 to 40 minutes in the playoffs would be my guess. Having said that, you actually raised an alarm bell for me because Thabo is actually injured. He'll be out 6 to 8 weeks. And so he might not be a big factor off the bench because I tend to kind of agree with something that Paul Shirley said in a recent Short Corner podcast, which is when you get like a nasty injury, like a really bad sprained ankle or something that's going to keep you out 6 to 8 weeks, it's really like something that's going to keep you out 6 to 8 months. Because 6 to 8 weeks is just until you're at a point where you can play again, but it's not where you're back in playing shape, where your mind is back into a mode where you can attack the basket without worrying about twisting your ankle or your knee or whatever it is again. That seems to be, I'm skeptical if that was going to be out 8 weeks. I'm skeptical that he's going to be in the kind of shape to be a huge difference maker in the playoffs. Having said that, they have a couple other reserve guys who are playing pretty solidly for them. And I agree with you completely. In the playoffs, it's your top five that win your games because the smart coaches know that there's no tomorrow to save for in the playoffs, right? It's win or go home.
I think the issue, and I think you're right on this, is that their top is good. Actually, their top's better than I thought it was, so I bumped them up a little. But the issue is...
Well, it's hard to win 40 out of 48 games unless your top is good.
But the issue we've got is we've got at least 3 teams that I'm going to argue. Let me check one other team. We just talked the Short Corner podcast, and one thing, they don't really care much for the Raptors, but they're a good team. So... yeah. If we look at the top of the Raptors with Lowry, Patrick Patterson, geez. So the issue is the Cavaliers, if they can turn it around, if LeBron James keeps up what he's been doing, if they give the ball to Kevin Love, their top competes with the Hawks top, and I'd argue it's a little stronger.
I'm torn here because I think that Cleveland has chances to go, all the way to the finals because LeBron is LeBron. At the same time, their offense is so predictable the way it's running right now. And a lot of the wins they've been having are from individual performers just kind of going nuts. Like that night that, again, I'm quoting the Short Corner podcast again, but like the night that Kyrie Irving scored 55, it was essentially like every other night that Kyrie Irving plays, except this was the one night where he didn't kind of implode. He was doing all the stupid shit he normally does in most games, except that night, all the stupid shit was going in. And so the Cavs are a good team, no question, but I don't see them being a great team because I just feel like when it comes to the playoffs, when it comes to a 7-game series where you can prepare for that team every night and you get to see the team. I think after one game, the Atlanta defense would know every play that the Cavaliers might possibly ever run. There'll be no more surprises because that team just doesn't have the kind of offense that's super flexible and has lots of decision points. You look at Atlanta's offense, and this is largely because of Kyle Korver, to go back to the videos that Coach Nick did on how Korver sets picks. That offense has a crazy number of decision points, and it's all read-based because anytime Kyle Korver sets a pick, he can do one of like 5 different things based on what the defense does. And that means if Kyle Korver sets like 10 picks in a game, you might, the next game, the next 10 picks he sets, you might not see the same decision come out of that offensive flow at all ever again from what you saw in the first game, because the decision points are all different. His reads are different. You might see Kyle Korver go 20 picks in a row without him ever doing the same thing twice. And when you're watching Cleveland play, well, it's like you said earlier, you kind of know what LeBron is going to do. And that's not saying you can always stop him, but you can kind of make his life difficult for him by clogging the lanes and making them shoot long shots and things like that. It's kind of the problem that Cleveland had the first time around when they went to the finals with.
Well,
their offense looks very much like that.
We get into an interesting thing because I think what we're actually arguing is Cleveland's potentially, if it can make it there, got a shot to upset Atlanta just because when you got LeBron James, the 2007 playoffs are perfect. When you've got LeBron James, you can have video game James take down the Pistons. But the problem is you're not going to get 2 series of video game James. You get 1 series of LeBron James carrying his team over a team they shouldn't beat, and then you run into the Spurs and they shut him down. So yeah. I think their chances are better than I thought, but I think I don't actually think Cleveland's the favorite. I just think they're dangerous. That's all.
I agree. And I both Cleveland and Chicago, I worry about the numbers of players they have on both those teams that have, either won titles or been in the finals or have all this playoff experience. And in a playoff series, that's going to be really important. And I would worry about Atlanta's ability to, let's just say I wouldn't put a bet on Atlanta giving even money in a situation like that, because I just think that factor is too big a factor. So yeah,
that's a shame because we have been all over Atlanta, and I hope they prove us wrong. The one thing I'll give them, and this is in basketball on paper, is when he discusses kind of unconventional strategies, and these may not keep up. He discusses 3-point shooting as one of the biggest difference makers, and that's one thing Atlanta really has. But one of the problems they have is I can see scenarios where there's bad luck or health issues, because we've seen those before to the Warriors. I just can't think of any scenario, though, where Atlanta goes up against the Golden State Warriors, who basically have the Atlanta playbook but better and a better team, and have a fighting chance. I mean, every team, if you make it to the finals, you got a chance, right? But, LeBron James made it to the finals against the Spurs, and they were like, well, you got a chance, but no, he's not really.
Yeah, and you kind of see, I think it was clear last year that Heat team was LeBron, and everyone else was very much struggling to, his supporting cast was not at the level it had been the years before that. And it really showed against the Spurs, and his supporting cast in Cleveland, I don't think there can be any doubt about this, is worse than his supporting cast was in Miami last year. So I don't see that really ending well for them. I mean, I think there's opportunities for Kevin Love to play better than he has played, but a lot of that is coaching and scheme. If you don't give Kevin Love the ball, he can't be good with the ball. I mean, the thing about Kevin Love is he's not like Tyson Chandler. He's not a player who will impact your game in huge ways when you don't give him the ball. The things that make Kevin Love good are how good he is with the ball in the offense. So if you don't give him the ball, he's not going to be a good player on that team. And so if they continue to refuse to give him the ball, he won't make the impact they want him to make. So I mean, you can say that he's a bad fit on the team, and maybe that's true. But to me personally, I think what you should be saying is that Kyrie Irving is a bad fit on that team because as good as he is as a shooter, they'd be better off having a guy like Kevin Love shoot 20 shots a game.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing about that team that kind of sums up their issue is when you get J.R. Smith, and J.R. Smith is an improvement to your team, you have done something horribly, horribly wrong at some point along the season.
Yeah.
That's all I got there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be so brief there, but my headphones did the thing again.
I guess they just don't want to hear it. Your headphones are like, we've heard
I gotta get myself some wired headphones, I guess.
I was gonna say I've hit everything I wanted to for tonight because I think before the show with technical difficulties, I actually had a really early morning today, so I'm good as far as anything. But if you want to talk anything else, I say go for it.
Oh man, my throat's all dry from talking. I haven't ranted this much in a while.
Well, that's good. Though actually, I'm not gonna lie. I don't mind being on the show every week. I actually like you with the ball a little more than me. I like it. So
you mean with the deflated ball?
Oh wait, so Patrick is gonna do. If you're watching the show live, can you deflate this? Come on, you just run.
I don't know.
It, right?
Can we deflate this ball? It's pretty deflated. This is, by the way, totally, and I'm not lying about this, a regulation inflated ball. I'm that strong.
Yeah,
totally lying.
Okay,
but not really. But yeah, totally.
All right. Well, I'm ready for shout outs if you are, man.
I give a shout out to Brian Burke for Advanced NFL Stats. Always a great follow. Probably one of the more knowledgeable people I like to follow about the NFL. And I'd like to give a shout out. I don't actually know if I have anyone else to give a shout out to. Did I mention someone in the pre-show?
I mean, we always do this. I mean, I think at this point, Kevin Draper, John Weiler at the ESPN Watch. And,
Jonathan Weiler. That's my shout out. Yes. Great piece today on the Super Bowl. And I love the point he made that given the complete inanity of everything every player said in all those post-game interviews, it just doesn't make any sense for us to get upset at Marshawn Lynch for not talking.
All right. And by the way, making my point there, what I was going to say is basically we might as well just during shout out time have Kevin Draper, Short Corner Podcast, Jonathan Weiler, just be up in the corner as just we could shout them out every week. And if we didn't shout them out, it's not because we didn't think they deserved shouting out for the week. We just, anyway, that's what we think there. So
I'm like the crazy reporter on the scene who can't hear anything. Sorry, guys.
All right. So I'll keep talking. I can type to you, Brian, if there's any way for you to signal to Patrick when I'm done.
You can watch on the script, Patrick.
It's kind of difficult.
Oh, he can't hear. Never mind. Damn. Maybe he'll figure it out. Keep going, Dre, though.
Talk and type, and we all know how that's gone before. So anyway, my shout-outs, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, is Bob Vulgaris. And what ended up happening there is, as I mentioned, he basically insulted me. He said, "You're out of your mind," when I said DeMarcus Cousins wasn't a star. And after that happened, I got a bunch of new followers, so I don't know how I can feel bad. I'm going to give, what I've been doing a lot is backhanded compliments. So it's a commenter named Francesco in the comments. I've liked some of your stuff. And one of my general issues I've had and he's brought this up a few times, I've deleted all these, is I'm going to have a post coming out on this, but when you ask about why your comment is deleted, it's actually very entitled. It is actually you saying to us, the people who write in the Boxscore Geeks, why don't you let me edit your site? And that's, I get it. You feel some ownership. You feel some ownership to the site. You love this stuff. We appreciate that. But the thing is, it's not your site. It's Patrick's. It's not your article. It's my article. And it's not at your discretion to decide what we allow on or not. And I know it's easy to think you're not being rude, but it's actually one of the rudest things in the world. The way I'll put it is, imagine you went into somebody else's house, you saw a bunch of pictures on their wall, and you said, "I don't like how these are framed. I don't like where these pictures are," and you started taking pictures down. So I'm going to delete any comment that asks about deleting comments because that's why I feel that way. But I will say, I get it. You're not as rude as other commenters. I at least wanted to let you know that because you asked about it again. But you've also done some good comments in the comment section. And I'll also give a shout out to another commenter, A. Williams87, who actually said, "Hey, I get why Dre might be getting rid of some of these comments because, if you've been following the blog for 5 years, we've seen some of these thoughts before. And maybe we just, we'd rather have some newer ideas in our comment section. And a last note on that, shout out to the commenters. You guys are great. Like, I'll be candid. I would like to get rid of comment sections, and I struggled a lot with that. And if you weren't such good commenters, I would have just told Patrick I wanted comments off the site. But you guys are too good, and I couldn't let you go. So I've made the decision to moderate heavier. That's how awesome you all are. So those are my shout outs. Some good, some backhanded. That's what I got for the week. Patrick, you want to shout us out, or not shout us out, end us out?
I will end us. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for putting up with these crazy technical difficulties. No picture from Dre, no headphones from me. Sorry about all those minutes where I'm just vacantly staring into the screen with nothing to say. I hope you join us all next week. And until then, have a good night.